Last week we finished up Acts chapter 19, where we saw how Paul had spent a lot of time in Ephesus teaching the people, and many people came to faith, and it affected the city as a whole. And because of that, there was a great opposition that came against Paul and against the followers of the way, followers of Christ. And so we read that last week. There was that great uproar in the city. But once that opposition, once the uprising subsided, Paul decided to press on in his missionary work. And as he continued on from Ephesus, the way he went about his journey reveals some qualities that impacted the ministry that he had. And these qualities, if we would put them into practice for ourselves, they're qualities that can help us impact our influence for the work of the Lord that we do. One of those qualities is to, number one, encourage one another. A simple thing, encourage one another. Acts chapter 20, verse 1, it says, "When the uproar had ended, Paul sent for the disciples, and after encouraging them, said goodbye and set out for Macedonia. He traveled through that area, speaking many words of encouragement to the people, and finally arrived in Greece, where he stayed 3 months." So we see here, before he left Ephesus, there was this great opposition, things finally settled down, but before he leaves, he calls together all the disciples in that town. And it tells us that he encourages them. And you think about what they had just gone through. There was this great uprising, an uproar within the city. There was the great opposition that was coming against them. And so Paul probably brought these individuals together just to encourage them in their faith, in their walk. To look at, we have come through this opposition, but more opposition is bound to come. But keep the faith, keep pressing on. And so he encourages them. But then he tells them goodbye, and he sets out for Macedonia. So on this journey, he's passing through the cities, the towns that he had already been to, and going to those churches and those groups that he was a part of putting together in those places. And he brings them together, and it says that he offered encouragement to them as well, encouraging words. And most likely, as he was going back through these towns, he's looking for his spiritual children, these individuals that heard him preach, heard him teach, and they accepted the teaching that was given. And they were his spiritual children. So he goes to encourage them because he wanted what was best for them, and he wanted to lift them up and build them up to continue in the faith, to encourage them. And so what that teaches us is that when we go through our day to day, we need to be sure that we are encouraging one another. You know, how many people are in desperate need of a kind word? Who are those that feel all alone and could use some encouragement? How many people out there are, maybe they have large families, maybe they go to work every day, maybe they're involved in different things, but they still feel alone. And maybe in those places there's very little encouragement. And what a blessing it would be to encourage those individuals, not only for us, but for the one receiving the encouragement. And it's not just encouraging for encouraging's sake, being encouraging in the faith as well. You know, I often wonder, how often do we talk about spiritual things outside of Sunday morning? How often do we have discussions, conversations about spiritual things? When was the last time that we had a spiritual conversation with somebody else? What benefit might there be that we would encourage one another in spiritual matters? And when we encourage people, we can encourage in many ways. Simply picking up the phone, giving somebody a call. I'm finding more and more that just sending a little text message to somebody, thinking of you, praying for you, or how can I pray for you, or, just whatever you want to send, just to let people know you're thinking of them, you care for them, you're encouraging them in their day-to-day walk. Or perhaps it's personal visits. That's a little more commitment for people to make that the commitment to go to people's homes or visit with them face to face. Or it could be sending a card or just a short letter to somebody. Could be an encouragement that someone is longing for and needs in a large way. And so we need to be thoughtful of and think about encouraging one another as we go through our days. Along with encouraging one another, as we go through our journey of faith and the journey of ministry that we're on, number 2, we need to make needed adjustments as we go through our days. Verse 3, the middle of verse 3, Acts 20 says, because some Jews had plotted against him just as he was about to sail for Syria, he decided to go back through Macedonia. He was accompanied by Sopater, son of Pyrrhus from Berea, Aristarchus and Secundus from Thessalonica, Gaius from Derbe, Timothy also, and Tychicus and Trophimus from the province of Asia. These men went on ahead and waited for us at Troas. But we sailed from Philippi after the festival of unleavened bread, and 5 days later joined the others at Troas, where we stayed 7 days. And so Paul was continuing on his missionary work, going on this missionary journey, and his travels had taken him to Greece. And we read that he was there for 3 months. And at the end of that 3 months, he's preparing to move on from there. But he was planning to move on. He was planning on going to Jerusalem. He was taking an offering with those other disciples, those other traveling companions that were with him. They were going back to Jerusalem to present an offering to the church. But in his plans, a change had to be made. It tells us that there were some Jews that were plotting against Paul. Perhaps they were making threats to his life because, again, the teaching that he was giving, the lives that were being changed, the effect that was having on the cities. And so there was, again, opposition arose against Paul. And so he became aware of that plot, and he willingly adjusted his plans. Instead of sailing to Troas, he and his companions decided to continue their journey on land, and that they would go ahead of them, or they would go one way, and the other group would set sail and they would go to Troas. But the men that were with Paul, they went ahead by foot to the city of Troas. And so a simple thing, as we go about doing God's work, part of that work includes encouraging each other. And there's unlimited number of ways we can do that. But as we go about doing his work, we need to be willing to adjust when needed. Perhaps we have plans to do something ministry related, something we're going to go care for somebody. There's a project we're going to do. But something happens, weather patterns make us have to change direction. Illnesses, work commitments, or a lot of times things that just break down around home. And instead of forgetting about the work that we were planning on doing, just make some adjustments. Again, the enemy's good at trying to stop the work that we are doing. So we need to be on our toes and to consider the changes that we need to make so that we can move forward with the work that God has for us. So make those needed adjustments when they come. And as we move forward in doing God's work, we need to, number 3, be willing to teach and quick to care. Verse 7, on the first day of the week, we came together to break bread. Paul spoke to the people, and because he intended to leave the next day, kept on talking until midnight. There were many lamps in the upstairs room where we were meeting. Seated in a window was a young man named Eutychus, who was sinking into a deep sleep as Paul talked on and on. When he was sound asleep, he fell to the ground from the third story and was picked up dead. Paul went down, threw himself on the young man, and put his arms around him. "Don't be alarmed," he said. "He's alive." Then he went upstairs again and broke bread and ate. After talking until daylight, he left. The people took the young man home alive and were greatly comforted. So here, Paul and his companions, they make the trek from Greece to Troas. And now he has the opportunity to talk with the disciples in that city. And it tells us he was planning on leaving the next day, so he wanted to share all he could. He had so much to share with the people. He had such a passion for the Lord, and he wanted the people to know as much about Jesus as possible. So it tells us that he taught the people until midnight. But there was a problem. They were in an upper room, and the room was filled with people. And since it was night, there were lamps, oil lamps, burning within that room to give the room light. And all of those things put together would have made for very warm conditions. And we understand that. We understand what Eutychus must have been experiencing at that time. He had a hard time staying awake. How many of us have had a hard time staying awake when someone keeps talking and talking and talking? And it tells us he was sitting in a window, and that was probably the coolest place in the room to be. But he still could not stay awake and ended up falling to his death on the ground below. But Paul was quick to care for Eutychus. It tells us that he went down and he threw himself upon Eutychus and he wrapped his arms around him. And because of Paul's compassion for this young man and because of his faith in Christ, it tells us Eutychus was brought back to life and returned to the upstairs room. And perhaps it was the wave of adrenaline that came from that experience and then breaking bread again. But then we're told that Paul continues teaching until daybreak. And so, Paul's passion for the message of Jesus Christ was so powerful that he was able to go on and on about the greatness of Christ. We talk about the unsearchable riches of Jesus Christ, that we cannot deplete who he is. And that's what Paul was doing. And he was sharing the message, and in the middle of it, he has this experience of death and someone brought back to life, and he continues to teach. And what that shows me, anyway, is, where are we at in our relationship with Christ? Are we growing in our love and our understanding of him? And if we are given the opportunity, would we be able to and willing to talk about him with others? And do we have that compassion for and care about those within our lives? Are we aware of those things that are happening around us? And are we quick to help those who are in need? In this case, it was death, but there are needs all around us. Are we aware of those needs, and are we getting involved in helping to meet those needs? So be willing to teach, but quick to care when given the opportunities. And then as we serve the Lord with our lives, let us always, number 4, make plans with purpose. Verse 13, he went on ahead to the ship. Paul went on ahead to the ship and sailed for Assos, where we were going to take Paul aboard. I apologize. We went on ahead. Luke, the writer of this of the book of Acts, he and his companions were on the ship sailing to Assos. And when they went ahead to Assos, that's where they were going to take Paul aboard. He had made this arrangement because he was going there on foot. Paul was going there on foot. When he met us at Assos, we took him aboard and went on to Mytilene. The next day we set sail from there and arrived in Chios. The day after that we crossed over to Samos, and on the following day arrived at Miletus. Paul had decided to sail past Ephesus to avoid spending time in the province of Asia, for he was in a hurry to reach Jerusalem, if possible, by the day of Pentecost. So Paul's journey continued. He was in that upper room in Troas, experienced all those things, but he continued on his journey, and it was a planned journey. It tells us he went to Assos, to Mytilene, Chios, Samos, and Miletus. And it tells us that he also chose to sail past Ephesus. Remember, Ephesus is where this journey began, where he was spent a couple years there teaching the people and making a difference in that city. But he wanted to sail past Ephesus because he was in a hurry to reach Jerusalem. These plans, they were purposeful. He had a reason why he did the things that he did. He chose to walk to Assos instead of sailing with his other companions. Perhaps he just needed that time alone to walk alone from Troas to Assos with the Lord. We don't know, but he chose to take that walk instead. He joins the traveling companions, and then he sails with them to Miletus. And here we're told that Paul chose to sail past Ephesus, this city that he would have had some deep connections with. But it was purposeful. His purpose was to get to Jerusalem. As I said, he spent 2 years in Ephesus teaching the people, so he understood, or he knew, that if he stopped at Ephesus, that it wouldn't be a short visit. And he didn't have time for that on this part of the journey. He would have needed extended time to be there, to see the disciples and to talk to them and to encourage them. Instead, as we will see next week when we continue on in this chapter, he goes to Miletus and he calls for the Ephesian elders to come to Miletus and meet him. And this was a way for him to connect with those individuals, yet be mindful of his time. Because he knew he had a difficult message he needed to share with these individuals. And so the smaller group of leaders was the best option for him to share that message. So for us, we are to be purposeful in making our plans. We are all, whether we realize it or not, we are all on a journey with the Lord. He has plans for each one of us. The question is, how can we plan our days to be best used by Him? So being mindful of the things that we do day by day. What's the purpose behind the life that we live? What's the purpose behind the things that we do? What is the spiritual significance in the walk that we are walking? So as we live for Him, as we continue yet another week, serving Him every step of the way, we need to take the time to strengthen each other in the faith. Be that encouragement to one another. We need to be willing to alter our plans, to be in line with God's plans. Those delays, those hiccups in our plans, those might be, or they probably are, God's redirection. And so we need to be willing to alter our plans. When given the opportunity, be willing to instruct people in the way of faith by sharing our own stories of what God has done and is doing in our lives, and how God can impact other people as well, but also be mindful of the needs around us. And when we see those needs, that we attend to those needs with what we have to offer. And as we make our plans each and every day, let us know the reason why we do the things we do. That we get beyond just the conversation, we get beyond just the making money or just doing our job, but there is a deeper purpose behind the work that we do for the Lord. And I pray that we become a people that are so in tune with our God that these qualities will just become a natural outpouring of our relationship with Him. That we will be those encouragers and teachers and caregivers throughout everything that we do. God bless you. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.